The dean said my name. And for a moment, the room felt smaller than it should have. I remember the sound of my steps as I walked across the stage. Kira Lawson. I didn't hold on to most of it. I was already looking past him, into the rows of faces I didn't know. And then I saw her. She was sitting a few rows back, holding the printed program in both hands, as if she needed something to steady herself. My mother. I hadn't seen her in 10 years. Not since the day she walked out of a hospital room without looking back. She looked older, but not in a way that changed anything. Just quieter. Smaller than the version of her I had carried with me all this time. I reached the podium and adjusted the microphone. I had practiced this enough to know where it would go. There was a pause before I started. It wasn't long, but it was enough. I want to thank my real mom. The shift in the room was immediate, even if no one spoke. It wasn't confusion at first, just attention sharpening. People leaned in without realizing it. I kept my eyes where they were. My mother didn't move right away. Then her fingers tightened around the program, and I could see the moment something connected for her. Not everything, just enough. Some moments don't just happen. They echo backward. My name is Kira Lawson. I am 25 years old. 10 years earlier, I was sitting on a hospital bed in Baltimore, trying to understand a diagnosis I hadn't asked for and a decision that no one had explained to me. I was 15 years old when my parents left me there. The doctor explained everything in a steady voice. He talked about treatment phases, timelines, and survival rates, and for a few minutes I held on to that part. The idea that this was something structured, something that could be managed if we followed the steps. The room felt smaller once the word cancer was said out loud. My father didn't wait long before interrupting. How much is this going to cost? The doctor paused, not long enough to seem surprised, but long enough that I noticed it. He started explaining insurance coverage, percentages, and estimated ranges. My mother stayed quiet beside the window, her eyes fixed somewhere past the glass. She didn't look at me, not once, even when my name came up in the explanation. When the doctor mentioned long-term treatment, my father leaned forward slightly, his focus sharpening in a way I had seen before, usually when he was making decisions about money or planning something that mattered. That's years, he said, and ongoing costs. The doctor nodded, then added that there were assistance programs, payment plans, options that could be explored. But the conversation had already shifted. My sister's name came up next, not directly at first, but in the way my father referenced timelines and priorities, college applications, preparation, everything they had been working toward for her. I sat there listening, trying to follow how we had moved from my diagnosis to a discussion about something else entirely, something that didn't seem to include me anymore. At the time, I thought we were still figuring things out. I didn't know it then, but the decision had already been made. The conversation didn't stop after that first question. It narrowed, like everything unnecessary had been stripped away, leaving only numbers and decisions behind. My father asked the doctor to be specific, not general. He wanted estimates, ranges, best and worst cases. The doctor hesitated for a moment before answering, then explained that even with insurance, the out-of-pocket costs over time could reach somewhere between $60,000 and $100,000, depending on how treatment progressed. My father leaned back slightly, processing it. That's not a one-time expense. He said, that's ongoing. The doctor mentioned assistance programs, but the conversation had already shifted. He wasn't dismissing the cost, but he wasn't presenting it as a dead end either. My mother finally spoke, but she didn't look at me when she did. We've been saving for Jessica's college since she was born, she said quietly. That fund isn't flexible. My father picked it up from there. She's applying to top schools next year. He added, we're talking about a future that's already in motion. He spoke directly to them, but I could feel the distance widening anyway. At some point, my father looked at me, really looked, as if I had just entered the conversation. We can't afford a sick child, he said. If we lose everything now, we lose both of you, my father added, his voice still steady, as if that made it easier to accept. There was no anger in it, no raised voice, just a statement delivered with the same tone he used when closing a discussion that, in his mind, was already settled. My mother didn't argue with him. She added something about being realistic, about having to think long-term, about not letting one situation take everything else down with it. I sat there, trying to understand how the conversation had moved so far without me. I wasn't being asked what I wanted or what I was willing to go through. I was being measured against something else, something that had already been decided to matter more. It wasn't cruelty in the way I imagined. It was colder than that. The doctor left the room first, saying he would give us time, though it didn't feel like we needed any more of it. A few minutes later, someone else knocked and stepped inside, introducing herself as a hospital social worker. She carried a folder with her, held close against her chest, and spoke in a tone that was calm without being distant. She explained that my care would be transferred to the state. She used words like temporary custody and state responsibility, laying them out in a way that made everything sound structured, almost routine. My father asked, "What does that mean for us, legally?" Her answer was clear. "It means your daughter's medical care would be transferred under state supervision. You wouldn't be responsible for the financial or medical decisions moving forward." There was a pause after that, but it wasn't hesitation. It felt more like confirmation. My mother asked, "And we're not required to stay involved?" "No," the social worker said. "That would be your choice." I watched them absorb that, the way people do when something aligns with what they've already decided. The folder was placed on the small table beside the bed, and the papers were turned toward them. My father read through the first page, then the next, moving quickly but not carelessly. My mother didn't read as closely. She followed where he pointed, signing her name where the lines were marked. No one explained anything to me directly. No one asked if I understood what was happening. When they finished, the social worker gathered the documents and told them what the next steps would be. Placement would be arranged. Treatment would continue without interruption. My father stood up first. "They'll take care of you here," he said. My mother gave a small nod, her eyes still not meeting mine. Then they walked out, one after the other, without stopping. The door closed behind them, and the room stayed exactly the same, except for the part that didn't. They didn't walk out angry. They walked out certain. The oncology floor felt different at night, not quieter in a comforting way, but more exposed, as if every sound had more space to settle. I stayed awake even after the lights were dimmed. Sleep didn't feel necessary, and there wasn't anything I was trying to rest from. The diagnosis was still there, but it had already moved into the background, replaced by something harder to define. I kept thinking about what would happen next, not in terms of treatment or recovery, but in smaller, more practical ways. Who would sign the next form? Who would answer if someone called my name and I didn't respond? At some point, I realized I wasn't wondering if I would get better. I was wondering if it would matter if I didn't. That thought didn't come with panic. It settled in quietly. It felt like a continuation of the same decision, just carried forward without anyone needing to say it again. The door opened sometime later, and a nurse stepped inside, moving with a kind of familiarity that didn't draw attention to itself. She checked the monitor, adjusted something near the bed, then looked over at me. "I'm Rachel," she said. "I'll be on this floor tonight." I nodded, not sure what else to do with that. She studied me for a moment, not in a clinical way, but as if she was deciding something. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I don't know," I said. She didn't correct me or try to reframe it. She just pulled the chair closer and sat down, staying longer than she needed to. That was the first time I understood what alone really meant. Rachel didn't change how she treated me, and that was the first thing I noticed. She followed the same routine every time she came in, checking the monitors, adjusting the lines, writing notes I couldn't see. There was nothing overly gentle about it, Nothing that made me feel like I needed special handling. But she came back more than she needed to. Sometimes it was for small things that didn't really require a return visit. Other times, she stood by the door for a few seconds longer than necessary, as if she was making sure the room hadn't shifted in a way she couldn't see from the hallway. When she was on shift, things felt more stable. Not better, not fixed, just held in place. When she wasn't there, everything felt temporary again, like I was waiting for something to fall apart. One evening, she sat down without picking up a chart first. That hadn't happened before. "I've worked on this floor a long time," she said, her voice even. "Long enough to know this doesn't go in a straight line." I stayed quiet, not sure what she expected from me. "My brother had cancer," she added. "He was younger than you." She didn't pause for sympathy. She just let it sit there, like something that didn't need to be explained further. "He didn't make it." I nodded, because it felt like I should acknowledge it, even if I didn't know how. "This is going to be hard," she said. "I'm not going to tell you otherwise, but you're not doing it alone." "I didn't ask for that," I said, before I could stop myself. She didn't react the way I expected. "I know," she said, "but that doesn't change what's happening." There wasn't anything comforting in the way people usually mean it. She didn't promise outcomes, didn't try to make it sound manageable, but she stayed. She came back the next day, and the day after that, and every shift that followed. That would have meant believing something could last. But I started to expect her. She didn't save me all at once. She just kept showing up. Treatment didn't begin all at once. It unfolded in steps, each one explained carefully, each one requiring consent from people who were now responsible for me in ways my parents had chosen not to be. A case manager explained my treatment would be covered under a state program. "There will still be limits," she told me, "but you won't be without care." That distinction stayed with me. Rachel didn't involve herself in the paperwork, but she made sure I understood what mattered in a different way. She reminded me when appointments were coming up, sat with me when side effects made it difficult to stay still, and stepped in when I started to withdraw without realizing it. The idea of foster placement came up gradually. It wasn't immediate, and it wasn't guaranteed. There were evaluations, background checks, decisions that took time. "You're not being placed somewhere just to fill a space," the case manager said. "It has to be stable." I didn't respond to that. Physically, the treatment didn't follow the clean progression I had expected. Some days were manageable, structured around routines I could learn. Other days disrupted everything, leaving me too tired to focus or too uncomfortable to rest. There was one week where the results didn't come back the way the doctor had hoped. The treatment wasn't working the way they expected, and the plan had to change. I remember sitting there, listening to the explanation, and realizing I didn't have the energy to go through it again. "I don't want to do another round," I said. The doctor didn't respond immediately. "Stopping now would make things worse," he said finally. I didn't answer. Rachel did. "You don't get to quit just because it's hard," she said, not raising her voice. It wasn't harsh. It was direct in a way that didn't leave room for me to pretend I hadn't said it, but it felt like one. I didn't say much during that appointment, but afterward, I stayed quiet longer than usual. Rachel noticed. Not immediately, but soon enough. "You don't have to act like this is easier than it is," she said. I nodded, not because it made things easier, but because it made it harder to ignore. Getting better wasn't a moment. It was a series of almosts. I thought I was past the worst of it. I wasn't. Going back to school didn't feel like returning to something familiar. It felt like entering a place I had already fallen behind in, where everyone else had continued moving while I had been paused somewhere I couldn't explain. I couldn't keep up. I missed details, lost track of assignments, and needed more time than I used to admit. The first major test I took made that clear. I stopped going to class for a few days after that. Not long enough for anyone to escalate it, but long enough that I knew I was starting to disappear again. Rachel noticed before anyone else did. "If you walk away now," she said, standing in the doorway. Don't pretend it's because you couldn't do it. I didn't argue with her. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that part of me knew she was right. When I got the result back, it wasn't close to passing. It confirmed something I had been carrying quietly, that I wasn't built for anything beyond average, that whatever progress I thought I had made didn't apply here. I didn't tell Rachel right away. She found out a few days later when I mentioned needing to retake it. She didn't react the way I thought she might. "Then you'll take it again," she said. "That's what it's there for." It was more like a refusal to let the result define anything beyond itself. But the sessions didn't stay surface level for long. The therapist asked direct questions, not about the illness, but about what had happened before and after it, about decisions I didn't make and the way they stayed with me. Naming those things didn't fix them, but it made them harder to ignore. Rachel never asked what I talked about in those sessions. She didn't try to measure my progress or push me to explain it. She just kept the rest of my life steady enough that I could keep showing up. The second time I took that test, I passed. Not by much, but enough. It wasn't a turning point. It was smaller than that. I didn't become exceptional overnight. I just stopped quitting. The foster placement didn't turn into adoption right away. The process took months. Rachel didn't treat it like something that needed to be decided all at once. She kept things consistent, the same way she had from the beginning, letting time do what it needed to do without forcing it forward. When the approval finally came through, it didn't feel dramatic. The paperwork took longer than I expected. Signatures, confirmations, final steps that made everything official in a way that couldn't be undone. When it was finished, I had the option to keep my last name or change it. I didn't take long to decide. Taking hers wasn't about replacing anything. It was about choosing something that had already chosen me. School became more stable after that. Not easy, but consistent in a way I could build on. Over time, the work added up, and the results started to reflect it. When I was accepted into Johns Hopkins, it felt like a continuation of that process, not a sudden shift. The recognition came later, through academic rankings and a selection I hadn't expected. My name started appearing in places that were easy to find. That's how they found me. The message didn't come directly at first. It passed through someone else, framed as an attempt to reconnect, to talk, to understand what had happened. There was also a mention of financial difficulty, placed carefully at the end. They found me when I became useful. He called the night before. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. We didn't know what else to do. He said. I let that sit for a second. "You did know," I said. "You just chose it anyway." He didn't respond after that. I knew they would be there before I stepped onto the stage. They had already told me they were coming. I didn't respond. But I didn't stop them either. When my name was called, I walked forward the same way I had practiced, steady and controlled. The auditorium felt large, but not overwhelming, and for once, I wasn't trying to disappear inside it. I saw them again as I reached the podium. My mother sat upright, her attention fixed on me in a way I hadn't seen before. My father looked less certain, his posture shifting as if he hadn't decided where to focus. I began the speech as expected, acknowledging the faculty, the work, the years it had taken to get there. Then I moved into the part I hadn't shared with anyone else. When I was 15, I said, I was admitted to a hospital a few miles from here. I didn't leave that room the same way most patients do. There was a subtle shift in the room, a quiet attention that replaced the formality. My parents made a decision that day. I continued. They chose not to stay. I didn't raise my voice or slow down for emphasis. I said it the way it had happened, without adding anything that wasn't already there. But someone else did. I let the pause sit where it needed to, then looked toward Rachel. I want to thank my real mom. The reaction came in stages. First confusion, then recognition. Then a stillness that spread through the room as people understood what had just been said. I didn't look back at my parents right away. When I did, My mother was frozen in place, her expression caught between understanding and something she couldn't adjust to quickly enough. My father looked down, his hands resting on his knees as if that was the only position left to him. After the ceremony, they reached out again. This time it was direct, messages that moved from apology to explanation, then slowly toward something more practical. There was mention of financial strain, of needing help, of hoping we could rebuild something. I read them once, then set them aside. I didn't respond, not because I wanted them to feel what I had felt, but because I understood something clearly now that I hadn't before. Some decisions don't end when they are made. They continue shaping everything that comes after, if you're listening to this, or seeing parts of your own story in it. I'll say this as plainly as I can. Pay attention to what people do when things become difficult, not just what they say when things are easy. That difference matters more than anything else. I didn't leave that stage feeling like something had been fixed. I left knowing I didn't need it to be. Closure didn't come from them. It came from choosing not to go back.